I stood in the county courthouse corridor, the light beyond the glass white as salt. Mariah, my former JAG turned attorney, smoothed the edge of my class a collar like a blade and said, "Deep breath, Lena. This is just a live fire drill you've done 100 times." I nodded, opened my olive green notebook and wrote the first line. Discipline kept me alive, and today it keeps my family's property intact. Aaron arrived early in a gull gray suit, the kind of man who knows where the lights will be kind. He worked the room, glanced past me like a misplaced pawn. I didn't look back. On the table in front of Mariah sat a brown envelope, heavy, thick, quiet as a round that hasn't been chambered. Inside were the pages we'd built over sleepless weeks, sharp enough to cut the noose that had been cinched around my throat since the day I married him. The courtroom was plain, dark wood, dry air. Judge Havorson came in with a mouth that didn't smile and eyes like a straight edge. He ran through procedure like range commands. Aaron's lawyer launched into the rehearsed story, a husband who sacrificed his career so his soldier wife could serve. Words like sacrifice, partnership, and shared dream were poured into the jury's ears like syrup. I wrote in the margin, every road sugared like that draws ants. Mariah didn't answer right away. She pressed a warm palm on the back of my hand, tamping down any reaction. "Remember the trigger clause," she whispered. "They bait you, you go silent. Let the paper talk." I stared at the crest on the wall and thought of hours on the range, the way a target drops when your breathing matches the shot. Then came their fairness pitch. Aaron wanted half of everything, including the New Mexico ranch I inherited from my father. They talked about fundraising dinners where he represented the home front, about how he stayed back so I could wear the uniform in peace. I heard my own name used like a medal, and the way medals get used to unlock other people's wallets. When Aaron took the stand, he smiled in a way that seemed to cool the room. He told the story of standing in a churchyard, watching me walk the aisle, voice catching, saying we built our spoils together. My mind flashed to a hot wind rolling across Fort Irwin, grit in the smell of BBQ, a clumsy, warm proposal. All of that had been true. Not everything that's true is kind. His eyes drifted to the brown envelope. One inhale, then he looked away. He remembered. So did I. A harmless-looking post-nup, a needle-thin clause sewn like a seam on a life raft. I don't worship law. I worship process, detect, verify, preserve the chain, wait for the window. Exactly how I build an ISR picture in the field. The judge asked Mariah if there was any agreement the court should consider. "Yes, Your Honor," Mariah said, voice flat and calm as desert before sunrise. She set the sealed envelope on the clerk's desk. A post-nuptial agreement with a clause addressing asset concealment and allocation of debt. Aaron snorted. Somewhere a metal clip on my notebook clicked like the slide on a rifle. I looked at my polished shoes and saw the ceiling lights tremble in the shine. On the range, I learned to count breaths. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. I did it again so I wouldn't laugh when the other side called marriage a risk-sharing startup. I remembered cocktail photos where they cropped out my face, invoices with fuzzy consulting memos, calls I'd met with silence. "We'll review the agreement if it's relevant," the judge said, weighing the room with his voice. "For now, proceed." I shut my eyes for a second, shoes scraping, paper whispering, someone's offended breath in the back row. I thought of my father, the gray fence boards in New Mexico, Aunt Rosa's rule, keep what must be kept separate. Mariah leaned close. "When I cue you, just nod. No more, no less. Let them expose themselves." I nodded. On the table, the colored tabs lined up like a range card. A for post-nup, B for bank statements, C for email headers, D for the LLC, E for the recording, F for receipts, G for the peacocking. An alphabet for telling the most complicated story of my life. Aaron folded his hands, rubbing his thumbs together, the small tell he has when he's scared. I'd learned to watch for that in long guard shifts. A stray motion says more than a speech. In that wood-scented room, I saw desert dusk slow over his shoulders, warm, pretty, almost gone. "We'll now address the agreement," the judge said at last. The second hand hopped a mark. I didn't look at the clock. I listened to my pulse change the way it does when a pop-up target appears. Mariah rose, tugged her jacket hem, the chair legs scraped dryly. "Your Honor, Exhibit A," she said, and the brown envelope seam gave way. If victory came, it wouldn't have trumpets. It would feel like the first ordinary breath after a night that wouldn't end. But before breath, there's desert. I was at the edge of it, and in the eye of the weather, only a thin sheet of paper. The judge looked up. The room went still. "We will now address the agreement," he said, and I let the sand in my lungs settle. Late spring Mojave felt like a cast-iron skillet left in the yard. At the USO cookout, BBQ smoke braided with gasoline and gun oil, country music leaking through the wind. I was stacking burger trays with SFC Ortiz when Aaron showed up wearing a smile that acted like we'd already met. He talked about a clean energy for veterans project, the kind of voice that gathers a crowd without a mic. I don't believe in instant chemistry, but those eyes understood exactly what powered a room. The next few weeks were a breadcrumb trail around Barstow, dusty coffee shop, three-screen theater, the base surplus store where I finally found running shoes that actually fit. Aaron arrived neat, on time, curious without preaching. On a unit day trip, he carried the water cooler and didn't make a show of it. We swapped family stories. I said the tin awning in New Mexico drums when it rains. He said there's a town where people still believe promises mean something. That ordinary kindness, quiet, unfancy, softened me. He proposed on the range after a night shoot with those black silhouettes standing like unanswered questions. He opened the ring box under headlights, no Neil, just face to face, his hands shaking and trying not to. I didn't cry. I was thinking if the Army runs on SOPs, a marriage needs its own. A few days later, on a JAG friend's advice, I put a postnuptial agreement on the table. I was direct. The New Mexico ranch I inherited is separate property and stays separate. If there's deception, the consequences land on the deceiver. Aaron went quiet, then nodded. He'd sign. That weekend, I drove him out to the ranch. Dirt roads stitched through yucca, a sky like a wall tent with no seams. Aunt Rosa hugged me until my ribs creaked, then set a tin box on the table, Dad's will, a property tax stubs, the deed. She spoke slow like prayer. Keep it separate, don't mix. I flagged what needed scanning and wrote notes in my olive notebook. Aaron walked the fence line, praising the light, the wind, even the old mower, still got a soul. When he tapped the boundary post with his fingertip, warmth ran through me with a thin line of worry. People who love a thing's beauty sometimes want to own the thing. That night, the kitchen smelled of green chili and beef. I asked about his company's paperwork, an older LLC he'd set up with a buddy. Aaron waved it off. Small stuff. He'd roll everything up later, more transparency soon. After that, whenever I touched the topic, he rerouted to something shiny, a fresh investor, a pitch that brought the house down, a gala where he met a retired general who agreed to mentor. I had no reason to distrust him, only the feeling of sand sliding through fingers, soft and somehow missing. We kept the wedding small in a town church, wildflowers in recycled jars, friends from base filling the pews. SFC Ortiz raised a glass, watch each other's six like you do downrange, and the whole room laughed. Mariah leaned in with a voice like an op order. Don't commingle the ranch, keep separate statements. Don't collateralize that asset for anything joint. I nodded and promised to store the documents somewhere dry and apart, the way you rack a clean rifle. Most evenings after, we sat on an old crate under the porch of our rental and listened to freight trains roll the horizon. Aaron talked future, I talked PT test. His palm on my knee kept time with the music. I pictured a steady straight line. Morning runs, chow hall lunches, afternoon drills, evenings fixing a squeaky table. Every straight line has a crease. Ours formed out of glossy event tickets, introductions like the brain behind the uniform, and the creeping sense I was a prop. I kept my olive notebook in my pocket. Weekly, I bulleted the ordinary, where each file was stored, which purchase paid for what, which photos we took, who might corroborate. Not because I feared my husband, I believed in process. In the army, you don't wait for the round to cook off before you find the safety. Later, when the bang finally came, that tiny safety kept me from burning. On the night before a short TDY, we counted stars over the desert while the wind combed my hair with the smell of dry grass. Aaron said he was proud of me. I believed him, or chose to. I didn't know an email was about to leave someone's outbox with promises larger than the truth, or that a company name would slip into shadow. That night, we were just two people who thought we'd figured out how to walk long. I kissed him, salt on my lips, and reminded myself, keep what must be kept separate. Next morning, I packed my ruck, slid a copy of the Post-Nup into a stiff folder, and filed it in the family drawer. I wrote a single time in the margin, 1945, the exact minute we signed, so memory could never argue with paper. When I locked the drawer, the metal made a quiet sound like a safety seating into place. I didn't know how hard the future would shake us. I only knew the procedure was ready, and the desert remembers every footprint, no matter how many layers of wind try to cover it. The LED blue parties all smelled the same. Expensive perfume, cheap fog machine, freshly uncorked ambition. Aaron guided me through the lobby like he was parading a keepsake. My wife's in the army, he'd say just loud enough for the table to hear. Eyes bored with appetizers lit up for a display case story about patriotism. I smiled, polite, said I did ISR analysis, and he chimed in that he handled the brains of the company. A few chuckles, a few toasts. People like standing next to a uniform the way they like standing next to a sports car. It throws status back into the lens. I started counting receipts. The platinum card slid like a knife through butter. Studio lights for a leadership talk podcast, a paid PR package, a rooftop, community build, rental, a fresh run of ocean dark suits. Our joint account memos filled with foggy words. Consulting, advisory dinner, angel follow-up. I combed through them and still couldn't see a map, like staring at desert and not finding the wind's path. At networking nights, Aaron told stories in the royal we. We tested the prototype. We're in talks with 2 funds. We believe in clean energy for vets. I was part of we until the cover photo snapped. In that frame, we meant Aaron and a marquee investor. My shoulder got cropped out. Another night, the MC called him the brain behind the uniform. The room laughed just big enough to turn flattery into a nick. I don't need anyone standing behind my uniform. This uniform stands on its own. After a short TDY, I came back to base a shade darker and bone-tired. I changed the kitchen bulb. Aaron announced like it was a gift. Another gala invite sat on the table. In the bank app, I saw a transfer to EV Outreach with the memo pilot. Pilot of what? I asked. He said it was a community test. You wouldn't get it, it's about signal. I thought about signal the military way. Sometimes it's bait. The more I tagged along, the smaller I felt. At a craft bar with a chalkboard menu, Aaron told people I had stage fright, so he usually spoke for me. Dust from clinking glasses glittered like truth sanded thin. Once I suggested he talk less and let the product talk, he grinned. In this world, whoever talks best wins. I didn't learn to shoot to beat people. I learned to hit what I aimed at. Winning by volume wears you down. Samir, the coup, was the only one who listened. Sports watch, constant glances at his phone to track shipments. We're spinning up a subdomain to test a newsletter, he said, fingers moving like he was typing midair. I asked casually and penciled subdomain. Into my olive notebook. It sat there like a lone pushpin on a big map, unconnected, not forgotten. The cracks came as soft humiliations. One evening, they pulled me into a women in tech photo. I stood center, hand resting on the trouser seam the way I do on the range. 5 minutes later, the pic went up on company socials, without me. Composition, they said. I don't argue composition. I wrote G-cropped photo in my notebook. Proof doesn't always need a speech. Another night, Aaron raised his glass. Without us, she wouldn't have the free time to serve, and people laughed. I stared at the wood grain and heard Aunt Rosa. Keep what's separate, separate. I realized service can be used as a stage prop, hoisted when you need shine, lowered when you need money. I'm a soldier. Duty isn't a brand. I turned the garage into a board, red pins for receipts, blue for events, yellow for email names. I strung thread from pilot spends to rooftop nights, from advisory dinners to peacocking posts. Some leads died in the sand like wind tracks. I knew what I needed next, metadata. Our first real fight didn't involve shouting. I asked about a payment me mode, founder retainer. Aaron sneered. We don't even pay me yet. Stop nickel and diming. It's a joint account, I said. He shrugged. Think of it like you're serving. This country needs flexibility. The word flexibility hit the space between us like a stone into a well, no sound of it reaching bottom. I ran in the heat and rolled 3 words around like brass: misrepresentation, commingling, pattern. Then an email invite, breakfast with investors. Hit my private inbox because someone fat-fingered a CC. In the headers sat a strange subdomain. I screenshotted it, moved it to my personal machine, and tagged it CC'd. I didn't know where it led, only that the map was starting to show. I called Mariah, kept it tight. She said, collect, don't touch his safe. Wait until the chain is complete, then open the lid. That night I leaned on our balcony rail and watched the 14 smear its lights. Aaron came home late, a new cologne spliced with smoke. He hugged me from behind and whispered, "It's all for our future." I nodded the way I do before a night shoot, not because I believe, but because the target needs stillness. The AC breathed dry across my forehead, and the air smelled like cold sand, the scent of weather turning. In the kitchen, I opened the olive notebook and wrote, "Money runs like sand when your hand is open." I wasn't opening my hand anymore. I'd cup it, catch each grain, count each scratch. Love can be kind. Ledgers must be strict. In the morning, I'd match every memo to travel dates, then make a separate grid for the places he talked the biggest. On the range, targets pop for a blink. In life, that blink is when words outrun truth. I only had to catch that moment, and I'd waited long enough. I turned the garage into a makeshift intel cell. Folding table, pinboard, a box fan whining like an old helicopter, a thermos of black coffee perched on an empty ammo can. On the wall, I sketched a money map, red pins for receipts, blue for events, yellow for names. Thread crossed and recrossed until choke points appeared. An advisory dinner right up against a pilot, an EV outreach, charged the night of a rooftop party. Biggest knot was the subdomain I'd spotted in that fat-fingered CC header last week. I labeled it CC'd. I didn't need a confession. I needed the geometry of facts. ISR taught me to start with metadata. On my personal laptop, I logged each email into a spreadsheet. Sender, recipient, message ID, DKIM, server time. A subdomain is like a private hallway in a brightly lit building. People move things through it without the main cameras seeing. I ran a who is, noted the registrar and the region, and saw the contact address masked behind a privacy service. In the margin, I wrote, "Hidden not equal to clean." That night, I tested a hypothesis. If they are using a subdomain to talk in-house and bait investors, some of that talk will drip into the open. I spun up a fresh email under a credible-sounding veterans nonprofit and pinged Samir about a pilot I'd heard whispers of. I didn't ask for documents, only timing. 3 hours later, Samir forwarded a chain, headers intact. There it was, a tunnel into the story's heart. Promises that funding was locked I knew didn't exist, and a product labeled live I'd only ever seen on a slide. I printed it, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and tagged it "See email headers drip." Then I logged the chain of custody, who received, who handled, where stored, so no one could claim it changed in my hands. Mariah video called. I pointed to the board and walked the logic. Subdomain right arrow thread right arrow inflated claims right arrow pilot spend. She nodded. "Don't touch his devices, follow what they leak. When we have enough, we'll build a narrative no court can refuse." I hung up feeling like I just cleared a weapon, clean firing pin, dry bore, full mag. Next, I walked the public road. State filings turned up an odd LLC in another state. Nearly the same name, just one harmless extra word, registered to a nominee with no online footprint. The shadow matched the object too well. I pulled the statement of information, and there it was. An e-signature that looked a whole lot like Aaron's on last year's loan. I tagged it D Hidden LLC, printed 2 copies, one for the brown envelope, one for the ammo can with the backup drive. In my notebook margin, I recorded the digital save time, 2030. The more I followed, the more their storytelling drifted a beat off the truth. An email said "We've secured," while the attachment said "Intent to explore." A slide deck bragged a finished assembly line, but the EXIF on the hero photo pointed to an hourly rental warehouse off the interstate. I didn't need to expose anyone in public. I just needed enough counterpoints to turn their loud "we" into quiet exhibits. I wrote a collection SOP, 2 printed copies of every file, labeled a G to match the wall, color codes synced to each pin. The backup USB lived in a zip bag inside the ammo can. On the lid I stenciled, "Paper beats volume." The checklist clipped to the handle tracked who touched what, when, and why. In uniform, we call that a chain of custody. At home, it was the valve that kept my comm from bleeding out. Samir texted an airy apology, the kind a tech guy sends after tripping over a wire. "Fundraising's exhausting. Everyone exaggerates a little." I didn't reply. I'm not hunting contrition, I'm charting orbits. The orbit said someone was sweeping assets into a side drawer and hanging a sign that read, "Shared idea." The orbit also said every time Aaron stood under stage lights, another bill slid out of our joint account with a community memo. One hot afternoon, the wind lifted my papers and I sat on the concrete floor to lay the pieces out. In the center sat a post-nup copy. To the right, B bank statements with the vague memos highlighted. Above them, C headers with the subdomain circled in red. Left corner, D Hidden LLC. Scattered around, F receipts and G photos where I'd been cropped out. I pictured the courtroom path. No need to call anyone a liar, just invite the judge on a stroll through a data desert where the footprints overlap. That night, Aaron came home late, buzzing about a high-caliber advisor. I poured water, asked, "Have you updated the statement of information yet?" He paused like a pebble had slipped into his boot. "Paperwork's my lane," he said. "You focus on your career." I smiled the way we do on the parade ground, neat, closed, aware I just logged something important. When he slept, I sent Mariah our first packet and a note. "Here's their geometry." The storm arrived quiet as sand. Next morning, a new drip hit my inbox, a pitch deck update. The road map slide hinted at a braided ownership structure. I didn't zoom the arrows. I zoomed the fine print, a faint sub-logo matching the hidden LLC. Print, tag, update the chain. In the board's corner, I wrote, "Don't blur, don't rush." On the range, they teach you not to chase the target, let it run into your sights. At home, I was doing exactly that. By the weekend, I walked Mariah through the checklist again. "Give the story some smell," she said. "Places, timestamps, people." I added the craft bar, the L, a rooftop, the MC who said brain behind the uniform. Then I planned the next step. Lock down a neutral witness, keep the audio clinical, and prep a war room in a friend's outbuilding. Somewhere no one would suspect we were building a story quiet enough for the gavel to fall exactly where it should. I shut the ammo can, tucked the USB away, and clicked the fan off. Outside, the desert had cooled. Inside, the pieces had finally stopped wandering. The shed behind my friend's house was usually stacked with old tires. That afternoon, we rolled everything into the yard, spread a tarp, set up 2 folding tables and a whiteboard taller than either of us. Mariah showed up with a black document case that locked with a combination and a dry erase marker like a baton. "This is where data becomes a story," she tapped the board, "and every good story needs rhythm." I hung the pinboard map I'd hauled over from my garage. Mariah laid down color tabs. A postnup, B bank statements, C email headers, D hidden LLC, E audio recording, F receipts, G photos / peacocking. She made me rehearse in that precise order, no jump cuts, no flowery metaphors. "Pretend the jurors are a new range unit that's never shot at night," she said. "You have to let them see the target pop, hear the tone, and take the shot on time." We built the cross-sex counterpunch. If the other side pushed the "we built it together" narrative, I yanked them back to A, the postnup, the trigger clause for deception or concealment, and the rule that separate property doesn't get swallowed by noise. If they argued commingling, I pointed to B, the vague memos that line up straight into F, party bills proving noise, not value. If they attack the email's provenance, I put C, the headers, on the projector, zoomed DKIM / message ID, then hooked into D, the hidden LLC, same hand, different signature, same shadow, new name. To close the sequence, I laid down E, the recording clinical with no narration to let the room settle itself. 1-2 punch, Mariah smiled. 1 to the sternum, 1 to the ribs. SFC Ortiz came in smelling like gun oil and sweat, the scent of a barracks. He took a chair and listened while I replayed the parking lot confrontation and where he'd stood. Mariah asked him only 3 questions: where he was, what he heard, whether he had any personal stake. Ortiz answered in an even tone, eyes forward like he was receiving orders. I knew why I could trust him, not because he's my friend, but because he can hold a position. Aunt Rosa video called from New Mexico, stacking dusty papers on a kitchen table. Dad's will, property tax stubs, fence repair receipts, and a photo of me under the tin awning still sweating. "Separate means separate," she said, each word knocking on my ribs. Mariah noted it down and said she'd ask the court to let Rosa testify briefly, just to stake the ranch's legitimacy, then pivot back to the agreement's law. I could almost smell sun-dried hay seeping into our concrete barn. We ran a courtroom drill. Mariah stood at counsel's table. I took the witness chair. Ortiz sat behind. On her cue, I walked through a G in tempo, each exhibit with a pivot line that linked cleanly. From a promise bigger than truth to the money path, from the money to stamped emails, from the emails to a company that changed its outfit. Every segment ended with a beat of silence so the jury could connect the dots. "Don't forget to breathe," Mariah said. "Court isn't a stage, and it isn't a range either, but the discipline is the same. We plan the service of process. The upcoming tech gala would be where Aaron told the story he wanted under lights and cameras. I didn't want to humiliate him. I wanted a period at the end of a sentence. Mariah said serving him at the gala wasn't theater. It ensured receipt, witnesses, and truth meeting gloss. He hates losing face, she said. Poke pride and the real voice comes out. Exhibit E will have room to breathe. I nodded, remembering how his smile went brittle whenever he heard the word paperwork. We taped a big security SOP to the wall, back up in 3 places, keep a chain of custody log, originals in a locked box, print only from a machine that doesn't sync to the cloud, transport in sealed envelopes. On the empty ammo can's lid I added a new line in paint. Paper outlasts performance. I don't hate a stage, I just don't want words pricing my father's land. By sundown, Mariah set a fresh brown envelope in front of me. To the court, she'd written in a slant, the black ink still drying. This one would hold copies of a D in clean order, tabs slightly protruding. With a contents sheet, an identical twin would go to the other side. We don't hide, she said. We just speak slowly. I thought of the desert, what said fast gets carried off by wind. I called a friend in base legal to borrow a better scanner. Under the barn, lights the printer thrummed, paper slid through our hands like range cards. Ortiz joked, looks like we're cramming for a cumulative exam. I said, exactly, and the answers are already written. We just need to mark the right bubbles. Then it was my turn to drill testimony. Mariah tossed jabs. Did you use joint funds on your separate asset? No. Did you know your husband formed another LLC? I learned it from public filings. Did you install anything on his devices to get emails? No. I used metadata from messages sent to me. Each answer a flat stone laid across a stream. I wasn't trying to look saintly. I was showing I'd walked the right path. We locked the finish. Once the judge read the trigger clause, Mariah would move to C and D, then E, and only then F and G as background, so it wouldn't look like a personal attack. Don't turn the peacocking into the centerpiece, she warned. The centerpiece is paper. I breathed out, remembering the bullseye I hit only after ignoring the bleachers. Good shots don't land because of cheers. They land because the line is straight. At 21:10, the wall clock clicked. We loaded the sets into 2 brown envelopes, sealed them, signed across the flaps, and logged place, sender, recipient. I added 1 wide strip of tape and felt the calm of a sling settling across my shoulder. Mariah flicked the envelope's edge. The soft pop sounded like confirmation. Tomorrow, she said. When the lights come up, we won't talk louder, we'll talk truer. I stood in the yard a minute, watching gold spill from the barn and listening to bugs thump the bulb. Night desert wasn't hot anymore, just the smell of metal and fresh toner. I pictured the gala, the server's footsteps, Aaron's face when he saw the envelope. No gloating, no nerves. Just a soldier before the last string of the day, target posted, wind steady, palms dry, pulse touching the sight. I shut my eyes and told myself, tomorrow, we put the period on the line. The Hilltop Hotel looked down on a river of city lights, like a ship's deck hanging in midair. In the lobby, blue LEDs washed over posters about innovation for the community, and glassware kissed itself into a fine rain. I walked beside Mariah, step for step, the way you do at a review. On stage, the MC rolled out the words I could recite in my sleep. Visionary, community builder, the brain behind the uniform. The spots tightened on Aaron's face, and I watched his smile flip on like a switch. The process server waited in the wings, arms around a brown envelope twin to the one we'd sealed. When he lands the line about you walk up, Mariah told him, then to me. No smile, no signal. Let procedure do its job. I blended into the crowd, fingertips resting on my ticket the way you touch a rifle grip. Aaron started telling the story he loves, how he held me up so I could serve, how he stayed home while I was far from home. Heads around the room bobbed in sympathetic rhythm. In my ears, Mojave wind moved through an old firing port, silent, long, without feeling. When his arm swept a grand circle, the server stepped in. "Mr. Vale," he asked, calm as asking a train time. Aaron hitched half a beat. "You've been served." The envelope tapped his palm with a paper-on-paper sound, but from where I stood it ricocheted like a test shot. Nearby tables fizzed. The stage lights kept burning, catching the instant his color changed. The MC's voice wobbled. Aaron forced a grin, set the envelope on the lectern like the wrong prop in the wrong scene. A pinprick of rage flared in his eyes, then dimmed under a crisis management smile. We slipped out while his speech staggered forward like a car skidding on sand. The carpeted hallway felt as quiet as a range after live fire. "He'll call," Mariah murmured. He did before we even reached the garage. I let it ring 3 times. What stunt was that in front of the entire industry? Gone was the PR lacquer. "Legal procedure," I said. He pulled in a breath and demanded we meet to settle this like adults, in the parking lot near the base gate. I agreed with conditions: lights, cameras, no audience. "You don't need fans," I said. "We need the truth." Back at the apartment, I swapped my class for a thin, earth-toned jacket and tied my hair up. Before leaving, I tested the recorder tucked in my pocket. A green LED blinked once and went dark. I wasn't hunting. I was opening a fresh logbook for the court. Driving through the base gate, the night wind carried damp dust and a line of cold along my neck. The lot was an empty airfield. Sodium lights poured gold, a chain-link fence running ruler straight at the edge. Aaron was early, parked at an angle, nose pointed toward the exit like he might rocket out. He slammed his door, sound hitting my chest like a curse without words. I clicked the recorder. E began. "You're going to withdraw," he said, no preface. "We'll reconsider your share, but you don't drag that pathetic little ranch into this." Pathetic hit my sternum, not for the land's value, but for what the contempt exposed. "The ranch is separate property," I said evenly. "And the postnup has a clause, you know which one." He snorted like I'd repeated an old joke. "Scrap paper," he said. "You think some flimsy postnup stands up? You." He broke off, switched keys, and stabbed where he thought I was soft. "Do you want your career clean or not? You think the court loves your little intel notebooks. You think I don't have friends on that base." A breeze pushed dead leaves along the paint-striped lane. I held his eyes. "Is that a threat?" He lifted his chin. "That's a lesson in how the world works." A shape crossed the lot, heavy steps measured. SFC Ortiz. He slowed when he saw me and gave a short nod, the kind you trade on a drill field. I didn't turn my head. "Say that again," I told Aaron. He mistook it for surrender and surged. "Withdraw, apologize publicly, and we share everything, or don't and face it." He ratcheted his voice down a notch. "That uniform won't save you." In my pocket, the pen against the recorder rasped cloth when my chest rose, small but enough to remember my own breathing later. Ortiz drifted closer and stopped a few paces off. "Everything all right, Sergeant?" he asked, eyes refusing bait. "All good," I said, still watching Aaron. "We're discussing legal matters." Ortiz nodded and held position a moment, like a mute survey marker, then slid toward another row, close enough to catch the words that mattered. His presence shifted the air. The wind inside my ribs cooled. Aaron kept spilling. He gave himself credit the way he does on stage. How many big chances he gave up for this marriage, how he shielded the narrative when I was away, how he turned me into an inspiration at galas. I let him talk. Every sentence was an arrow popping his own balloon. When he paused for breath, I said, "You're being recorded." For a split second his face hardened, then he laughed. "Terrifying, you think that toy saves you?" I raised a palm to keep space between us. "I don't need saving," I said lightly, clearly. "I need a chain." Ortiz coughed, barely a quiet copy. Aaron looked at me like a math problem he no longer cared to solve. Finally, he flicked his hand and tossed a parting line over his shoulder. Court's about who tells it better, not who's right. He climbed in, fired up, and his headlights sprayed a white band across my face before he spun out. Gravel pinged my heels, cold as metal. I waited a few seconds for my pulse to level, then stopped the recording at 21:05. Ortiz came up, didn't pry, just said, "If you want a statement, I'll keep it short and on the point." "Short, factual, no color," I said. He nodded and walked toward the gate like a shadow that knows when to fold. At home, I downloaded E to the hard drive, set it in the empty ammo can, then filled out the chain of custody log: time, place, device, handler. I sent Mariah an encrypted copy with notes. Key excerpt, the threats, the line about the uniform. 5 minutes later, my screen lit. Heard it, clear quality, enough to corroborate with the witness. "Sleep, soldier." I smiled, slipped off my jacket, and caught the smell of road dust in the cuffs, and the faint paper scent of the brown envelope still hanging in the air. That night the room lay quiet as a desert after wind. I pulled the curtains and let a ribbon of freeway light crawl the ceiling like a fire snake. I didn't feel triumphant or afraid. I felt the straight line we'd drawn and the target set to the right height. In the morning, we'd add one more tab to the file's edge and wait for the court to open the envelope. The flashy part was finished at the gala. What remained was paper, a voice stripped of its gloss, and a sunrise with no audience. I slid my notebook under my pillow, listened to my heartbeat slow, and let the desert air move through my chest like a breathing drill. The courtroom was fuller than day one. Shoes scuffed, pens clicked, someone cleared a throat, sounds weaving together like sand pushed by a fan. I sat straight, black jacket pressed, service pin tucked under the fabric, not for display, just a reminder of where I come from. Aaron came in with his attorney, face wound tight like a guitar strung past pitch. I didn't look at him. I looked at the brown envelope on the clerk's desk, its sealed edge as neat as a dress uniform crease. They opened with the bright picture: marriage as a joint venture, risks shared, invisible contributions, a husband's noble sacrifice so a woman in uniform could serve in peace. The math was simple. Everything is ours. I heard the word commingling roll across the floor like a loose bolt, slick, but it still leaves a mark. Mariah jotted a couple strokes, stood, and in a voice calm enough to make the wall clock suddenly loud said, "Your Honor, plaintiff will proceed in exhibit order. May we open Exhibit A?" The brown envelope tore. The sound wasn't loud, but the room shifted. There was the clause I know by heart, tight, short, precise as a command. Mariah pointed to the highlight, a postnuptial agreement defining separate property, plus a trigger. If assets are hidden or misrepresented, any related assets and debts stick to the violator. Any claim against the other's separate property is denied. "We're not arguing feelings," Mariah said, eyes forward. "We're asking the court to read the words." The judge read, lips moving, then tapped the gavel lightly. "Relevant and admissible. Exhibit A is received." The defense coughed and pivoted. "Even with an agreement, Your Honor, practical commingling erodes it." Mariah didn't miss a beat. Exhibit B. Bank statements with tabs. Those hazy memos that once made my skin itch now lined up cleanly, each mapped to an F-coded receipt. Rooftop nights, PR packages, advisory dinners. "This isn't investment into plaintiff's separate asset," she said, voice noon desert hot without evaporating. "It's image spend and fundraising. More importantly, Exhibit C." The screen lit and an email header appeared like an X-ray. D. Kim, message ID, a subdomain path. Laser pointer circled the hallmarks. "From this subdomain," Mariah said, "defendant and associates sent letters using we've secured and locked funding, while attachments read intent to explore. Ambition isn't on trial. Misrepresentation is." She advanced to Exhibit D. A hidden LLC in another state, near twin name, nominee owner, e-signature matching defendants on a prior loan. "This is shade," she said, and Exhibit A specifies what happens when someone stands in the shade and calls it sunlight. Defense hurried in with startup context. Everyone talks big, fundraising language, and moved to strike the emails as unauthenticated. Mariah didn't lift an eyebrow. Authenticated by metadata and chain of custody. The emails reached my client, were time-stamped on receipt, and are corroborated by a lawful recipient's copy. We also have a neutral witness to threats tied to these records, SFC Ortiz. Ortiz walked up straight as a military road. He kept it short. Time, place, the exact words he heard, nothing added, nothing sanded off. When defense asked if he was close to me, he said, "We're teammates. In my statement, I write what my ears caught." His voice settled into the room like a stone on a lid, not heavy, just enough to keep the truth from blowing away. "Your Honor, Exhibit E," Mariah said and played the parking lot clip. Wind first, dry, long, then Aaron's voice. "Withdraw, that uniform won't save you." The whole room heard the silence that followed, the one that made me relearn how to breathe. Mariah stopped at the beat, not squeezing it for drama. "We don't offer E for pity," she said. "It fits the pattern. When confronted with paperwork, defendant chose threat over transparency." Aunt Rosa appeared on the monitor next, laying old papers in front of the camera. My father's will, tax stubs, fence repair receipts. "My niece's ranch is separate property," she said, eyes on the lens. "Since her father passed, we haven't used joint funds for that land." Mariah nodded and asked the court to note how Exhibit A, combined with origin and management, cements the ranch's separateness. Defense tried one last break. "Even so, Your Honor, built together is the spirit of a years-long marriage." The judge looked up, glasses dipping halfway down the bridge of his nose. "Spirit doesn't override clauses," he said, voice thin as a blade. "We have an agreement, a trigger, and indicia of concealment and misrepresentation. I won't let noise drown the text." Mariah bowed her head slightly and closed the circuit. Under Exhibit A, once the trigger fires, debts arising from that conduct attached to the violator. We ask the court to deny half of everything against plaintiff's property, affirm the ranch as separate, and allocate fundraising/PR debts tied to false statements to the defendant. We're not asking for anything of his. For a few seconds, I heard only the second hand jump. Aaron's shoulder ticked. His chair creaked like a confession. The judge turned pages, set down his pen, and spoke slowly. "The court denies defendant's claim to half of plaintiff's New Mexico ranch. It is plaintiff's separate property. The postnuptial agreement is valid, and the trigger has been activated. Debts associated with concealment and misrepresentation, as shown in Exhibits C and D with supporting proof, are allocated to defendant. Luxury and PR expenses from the joint account will be adjusted proportionally, but create no claim on separate property." A gavel, one clean strike, no applause. Mariah squeezed my hand, the pulse at my wrist settled into a measured march. Defense noted intent to appeal. The judge recorded it, voice unchanged. "Today the words have spoken." Aaron looked at me, no smile left, only the question stuck in his throat. How did paper beat chatter? I didn't hate him. There was just no way to stay once the straight line had snapped. I stood, filed the color-tabbed exhibits into my case. In the glass door, I caught my reflection. A woman in uniform on the inside, hands steady from trusting procedure. Down the hall, sunlight ran over the tile like molten metal, but in my chest the air was cool. No fireworks, no brass band, only the feeling of a black target dropping on cue and a desert finally breathing. The morning we left court, sunlight laid a thin metal sheen over everything. I didn't take a victory photo, No one wants a keepsake of a marriage splitting like a river into two branches. On the steps, I popped a button on my blazer and let my lungs fill. Mariah hugged me the way you hug a teammate who finished the mission. You don't win by talking loud, she laughed. You win by talking right. I nodded. The desert around us was quiet like a range after class, the faint smell of fresh paper and envelope glue clinging to my hands. The next weeks were all procedure. The debt sheet got rebalanced per the ruling. PR and fundraising costs that couldn't show any joint benefit blew back toward Aaron like a kite in a headwind. I turned in the apartment keys and boxed my life into a few cartons. The olive notebook, a couple sun-faded ball caps, a photo under the New Mexico porch, a packet of papers finally stamped done. Ortiz helped load, professional and silent. Before he left, he pressed a small scrap of paper into my palm. If you want a class for military families, I can pull folks together. I kept it like a line that led back to ordinary life. An email arrived. My warrant officer packet was approved. Not a trophy, just the next brick in the same straight row. The new nameplate on my desk read like a promise. I grinned alone, thinking about the small sessions I'd teach. How to read a map not to admire the curves, but to find the way through. People learn some things slowly and need them repeated. Process keeps you honest, and honesty keeps you alive. I found a tiny office near the base gate. White walls, a window over a patch of scrub, and a /C unit with a steady drone. I taped a sheet to the board. Desert Vets Fund, basic financial and legal readiness for military families. The plan was as simple as a checklist. Read your statements, separate from marital, keep the chain on your documents, say no to glittery pitches. I wasn't trying to turn anyone into a lawyer. I wanted them to know where the drawer locks. On my first day off, I drove to New Mexico. Out on the highway, the wind turbines turned like quiet compasses. The ranch showed up after a bend. Gray fence, stubborn maple, the tin roof still ticking when the wind went by. Aunt Rosa waited on the steps and hugged me tighter than usual. She didn't ask how court went. She asked if I was sleeping. Less but deeper, I said. She smiled. Like a soldier. We fixed a few loose boards, swept the yard, swapped the porch light. The sun sank slow over ground that wasn't up for debate anymore. Each step felt like setting my name back into a piece of dignity. That evening, we sat under the awning and listened to crickets. Aunt Rosa pulled a brown paper bundle from a drawer. One-color flyers, thick stock, the ink still fragrant. I ran a test batch for your Desert Vets Fund, she said, eyes bright with the wisdom of someone who's lived long enough to know paper can save people. Don't wait for a crowd. Fire prevention starts while the wires are still dry. I held the bundle and felt the soft weight of beginning something meant to fix, not to gloat. Late, my phone chimed. Samir. No fancy subject line. A few tight lines. An apology for the thoughtless forwards, for the culture of exaggeration he'd benefited from for not stopping sooner. He wished me peace and said he was leaving the company. I read it and didn't heat up or cool down. Forgiveness isn't the job of an inbox. It's a slower breath, a choice not to steer the story until you're sitting on the judge's bench. Back at the base, I painted the office wall, hung a Mojave map, and set an old tin can on the desk for pens. Over the table, I taped a line, paper outlasts performance. 6 people came to the first class, 3 soldiers' wives, 1 soldier's husband, 2 newlyweds. I spoke in an even voice with no parade of trophies. Account types, snapping photos of receipts, noting the time and place of signatures, reading email headers, asking one clean question. Does this asset fall within the separate boundary? They took notes the way I do, careful, cautiously optimistic. I told them I once thought love was enough. Turns out love needs paper so noise doesn't eat it alive. In the corner, the empty ammo can still sat there, now filled with chalk and board rags. I kept it as a finished story, a reminder that shells change jobs but core discipline doesn't. Ortiz swung by after training, leaned in the doorway for a bit, then smiled. "You teach like you shoot on time, on target." I told him to come tell the class about chain of custody next week. He nodded and said, "Pick a day when the sun's not punishing." One afternoon, the wind pushed the window open and the porch tin clacked. I stood in the middle of the empty room and watched sunlight lay a grid of squares on the floor. No more brown envelopes waiting to be opened. No more blue gala lights pouring down my back. Just the soft tap of a pen on desk edge and a fresh class calendar taking up a whole column of wall. I thought of Aaron briefly, not angry, just a sadness that had moved off the map. Then I thought of the people who'd walk in carrying questions they didn't yet have words for. I'd hand them an alphabet. They could build their own sentences. At dusk, I ran the sand road behind the base. Mojave sky scrubbed everything clean. Few foolish stars, a young moon. I breathed in the old cadence, thinking of the courtroom wood, the gavel's crack, the way the room lightened when the text was read. Freedom doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just moves into your lungs and you stand a little straighter. I stopped at the edge of the training field, hands on hips, and listened to my heart keep time like distant review boots. I know how to close things now, the way you close a rifle's sight. And in the morning, I'll unlock the door, flip the switch, set out a few more folding chairs. The desert will keep blowing, and I'll keep my place.